Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. For years, school districts and state education departments have searched for ways to effectively and fairly evaluate teachers, while at the same time measuring student performance. There's been a great deal of discussion about how much student performance should impact teacher effectiveness. In fact, is there truly an effective way to quantify teacher effectiveness or student performance in a way that allows for comparison across grades, schools, and districts? The answer seems to be the development of student learning objectives, or SLOs. To be fair, not all teachers are required to develop SLOs for their students. Only those who do not have a state exam administered at the end of the year. And here is the controversy. While teachers who use SLOs have more control over what they will measure, there are some who feel that SLOs are too subjective and are difficult to use fairly for evaluation. After all, how do school administrators evaluate teachers against learning targets when it is the teachers who are setting those targets? To help us sort through the concerns surrounding student learning targets, today we welcome Dr. Linda Mayger, Associate Professor in the Department of Educational Administration and Secondary Education at the College of New Jersey, and author of the article, "This is the Piece of the Pie We Can Control: Educators' Experiences with Student Learning Objectives as Performance Measures," where she discusses her research on the use of SLOs around the country. Dr. Mayger, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Now, for those who may not be totally familiar with teacher and student evaluation, kind of explain to us what the intention of these student learning objectives, or SLOs, was, including how long they have been in use.
So the student learning objectives really came to the forefront around 2015. So there was a movement to start evaluating teachers using standardized test scores. And it happened during the Obama administration. And what they realized after they had already made a federal mandate to evaluate teachers using standardized test scores, this mandate was if you got Race to the Top grants, or if you were getting a No Child Left Behind waiver, which most of the states eventually did. What they realized after they made the mandate is that only 20 to 30% of teachers actually have students who take standardized tests. So if you are not a teacher of math or reading in elementary grades 3 through 5 or in middle school, there are no scores. So then there was a scramble to figure out, well, how are we going to evaluate teachers? These other teachers. And they came up with 3 particular ways to do it. One of it was just to use the standardized test scores for the whole school and evaluate all the teachers using those, which that doesn't connect to like the PE teacher. And then the other idea, and I think Tennessee tried this, was to create standardized tests, or, they created like elaborate portfolio assessments for all of the teachers, which is extremely resource intensive and still very problematic at the high school level, because in high school, different teachers are teaching very different content. So the third idea, which was kind of the default, which was student learning objectives. And it was thought, well, this is pretty easy. We'll just let the teachers set these learning targets, and then they will identify assessments. And so they can be tailored to every classroom. And that's really where it came from. About 37 states either mandated student learning objectives or made it an option for districts, because some of the states let districts do it. The state is not controlling necessarily what they do. A few states did what New York did, which said it's only for the teachers who don't have standardized tests. States like New Jersey and Pennsylvania, all the teachers have to do it, even if they are also getting evaluated based on standardized test scores.
It seems like it's very labor intensive, especially when you think about the entire school at this point, like you say, in those particular states where all teachers are developing these SLOs.
Yeah. So one thing I did want to say is that once ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, came through, the mandate was removed, and it really was up to states whether they want to still do this. And so some states have really walked it back and stepped away from SLOs because of just what you said. It's really labor intensive for principals. And in states like Oregon, they had created a really heavy observation regime where even tenured teachers were getting observed multiple times a year, and the principals just could not keep up with the workload. Now, Pennsylvania has walked back the SLOs. They've kind of changed them to something a little more informal, but New Jersey is still all in on SLOs. They call them SGOs, but principals are overburdened. And so it's become a compliance activity in some places. The teachers turn in the same thing every year. The principal rubber stamps them, and it's really just bureaucracy.
I was going to ask you my next question, because since they have been in use, SLOs have been in use since, you say, 2015. How can they be considered somewhat flawed? And I guess that's one of the reasons you just gave. One of the examples is that they become this, well, I'm just going to comply, just do this out of compliance. And then the principals are just going to rubber stamp, okay, you have this, you turned it in, let's go with it. Any other ways that you can see that is not really working well?
Right. So it's not working well for a couple of reasons. One, there's the compliance piece, where they're in the best case scenario, they're like, we're already doing this stuff, so we're just doing the bureaucracy to get it through. But there's also cheating. I mean, if you have teachers setting the targets, there's incentive to set them low. If you have teachers picking the assessments, there's an incentive to pick easy ones. And if you have teachers scoring the assessments, there is, they're on their honor to score them in a reliable way. And the thing is, we knew about this. These came out of the performance pay measures, especially in Denver. Denver's the one that birthed SLOs, and they knew this from the very beginning that this was a problem. And there has really never been a way to get around that. In the states where all teachers do SLOs, they've tried to make the teachers who have standardized test scores use standardized tests, but there are no standardized tests for, PE teachers, music teachers, teachers like that.
So let me get this straight. So in those states that actually have these, I guess, merit pay that teachers can earn at the end of the year based on their scores or based on these results from the SLOs or meeting their targets, those teachers are designing the targets. They're setting the targets. They're designing or finding the assessments they're going to use to meet those targets. And then they're grading their own students who took those assessments to match those targets. And nobody saw that this was a problem when you link merit pay to these SLOs?
Well, they did. And there weren't too many all states that went in. The three places where the studies were most rigorously done were Denver, Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and Austin. Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and Austin abandoned merit pay pretty fast because they realized that if the teachers who had standardized tests, they were using those to evaluate, and there was some rigor. And in all honesty, a lot of these policymakers only care about math and reading. The other teachers are kind of not even on their radar screen. Denver kept SLOs for 20 years. They kept their ProCom for 20 years until about 2 years ago. The teachers went on strike because their pay was fluctuating so widely. It was fluctuating as much as $5,000 a year, which when you're not making a lot of money, that's a lot. And so they finally got rid of SLOs. But yes, they knew from the very beginning that there were some of these problems, but the ideology, behind merit pay, that this was going to be a panacea. And there were some people who really wanted to get rid of the graduated pay scales. There was a whole political movement that really wanted to go in about 20 years ago on merit pay, thinking that this would be a way to kind of break teachers unions and also get some, save some money maybe. So it hasn't, they've been trying merit pay for 100 years. And the same problems come up over and over again. And one of them is that it's really difficult to evaluate teachers, especially if you want to put a number on somebody's effectiveness.
Yeah, I can tell, again, as a former principal and school administrator myself, it is hard to really quantify teacher effectiveness because there's so many different factors that go into it. It's not just how a student scores on a particular exam, because we know by the research that students are test phobic. And there are a lot of other factors that go into their test anxiety when they're about to take an exam. But there's so many other factors just from the regular day-to-day that impacts how a student learns. And so that you really can't judge or really evaluate a teacher's effectiveness based on a score that a student gets on a test that they take once in 180 days.
Correct. And the other thing is you get down to some questions about what does it mean for a teacher to be effective? Obviously, academics is a piece of that. But if you're a kindergarten teacher, yes, you want to teach those pre-reading and early reading skills, but you also are teaching children how to do school. You're helping them to be safe. You're helping their social emotional learning. And all those pieces are, you as an administrator, I'm sure, we're looking at a lot more than just, is this teacher, teaching math and reading?
Yeah, I mean, you get teachers out there, get students who are 2, 3, 4, 5 years below grade level in math and reading. And now you're going to grade or evaluate them on their effectiveness to get them to, if they're a fifth grader, to get them to that sixth grade level. Well, how about if they're a fifth grader reading on a second grade level, how about evaluating the teacher who got the student to move up to the fourth grade or even the third grade, fifth month? Or something like that, because it shows improvement. They were effective to a degree in moving that student forward. Yes, that student may not have gotten to sixth grade where they need to be at the end of the year, but look where they began and look how far they've come in that time that they've worked with the teachers. So isn't there anything that we can do to kind of take that into consideration?
Well, I think SLOs actually do take that into consideration because teachers are figuring out a baseline and they're saying, how much growth are students going to make throughout the year. So they actually do that pretty well. And there's nothing wrong with SLOs. I think they're a great idea, although there is some question about how useful long-term goals are for teachers as far as instructional utility. A lot of the goal setting for most teachers are thinking about is, what do I need to learn kids to learn in this unit? What do I need to work on tomorrow? So I think that SLOs can do that. That growth piece is really important. But I think we also know that there's a lot of complexity involved in a fifth grade student who's working at a second grade level. A teacher may spend months, a big portion of the school year, trying to figure out what's going on with that student and what's the barrier. And a student in that situation is really defeated. So it's just compressing a lot of complexity to what teachers do by just focusing on the academic piece.
We know that you just mentioned that developing these SLOs is a very complex process, and you have to really know your students. You have to know your content. There are a lot of things that the teachers really have to be aware of in order to put an effective SLO together. But now we also know that, and that might be fine for the veteran teachers, the ones who have 10 plus years experience in the classroom. They might be able to do this a little bit easier. But we have a lot of new teachers coming in, people who are just out of school, who are becoming into the classroom, who also have to do this. So what type of training do teachers really receive in order to help them prepare and develop these SLOs?
Yeah, so you need this whole database decision-making and goal-setting piece. And actually, originally, that was a big problem even for veteran teachers. And one of the things that came through in my interviews is, I asked teachers about their goal setting. How did you set goals? And at first, they were like, it was a mess. I was setting the targets too high. I was setting them too low. I didn't know how much to expect them to grow. Most people have kind of worked the bugs out of that. Of course, a lot of them are setting the targets pretty low. It really depends on where new teachers are coming out of schools of ed. Like at TCNJ, we're teaching database decision-making to our undergrads. Not every school of ed is doing that. So there is definitely a learning curve as far as figuring out what's a realistic target, what's a measurable goal, how to connect these things together.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is Dr. Linda Mayger, professor at the College of New Jersey and author of the article, This is the piece of the pie we can control. Educators' experiences with student learning objectives as performance measures. Let's get into a little bit more of your research that you've done. And again, you've interviewed teachers from across the country in various states on this issue. So what have you really found? What are some of the common threads maybe that you have discovered among the different teachers in different states?
So I not only interviewed, I also did surveys. So I surveyed over 300 teachers in 17 states. And so really the vast majority of teachers and principals, because administrators were part of my study, it's a small percentage, and no more than about 10%, who have positive views of student learning objectives or think that they are accurate measures of student learning or our teacher performance. As I said before, student learning objectives, there's nothing wrong with them in theory. Like they're very similar to some things that we do in PLCs. The issue is, should we use them to evaluate teachers' performance? Should job decisions, professional development decisions be based on that? And so the vast majority of people have a very neutral opinion of them. Either they see it as meaningless bureaucracy. A few of them, in some of the better performing schools are like, we're already doing this and we're actually doing it better. So, this is just tedious. There's a small percentage who do like them. A lot of them, there are some low performing schools who have taken student learning objectives and they've really used them. And the principals feel that they have made their schools better. And so, it's not that this is a bad tool. The question is it a tool that should be forced on every school and every teacher? And especially looking at what's going on like post-COVID. Last year, most teachers will say was the worst year they've ever had. The learning lags are huge. There's a lot of work to be done. So do they really have time to be doing things that are not bringing value?
Now, I noticed also in your research that you kind of categorize teachers who, in their use of SLOs, as saints, cynics, and sinners. So why those particular monikers, and how did we develop that, get those categories?
So that actually came from Marshall. So he does the Marshall memo.
Yep.
Kim Marshall had an article where he categorized principals as saints, cynics, and sinners. So the saints are the ones who are like all in. They're trying so hard, and there were teachers who were like, I really like to push myself, and I set high targets, and I really, I'm picking the best assessments because this is really meaningful to me. The cynics are the compliance people. They're like, get it done. I'm going to set the lowest possible goal because I don't buy into this system at all. And if this is what I have to do, I will jump through the hoop. And then the sinners are the ones who are cheating. they're and not too many people in my study admitted to cheating. It was a lot more of teachers saying, I think other people are cheating. And so let's say nobody's actually cheating, but people perceive that they are. It's poisonous to a school culture.
Yeah, the opportunity does exist for the cheating to happen, or gaming the system, as they say. So you have those too many loopholes that are open because of this. Now, and I love Kim Marshall as well, the Marshall memo. And so not that I'm plugging it or anything, but the Marshall memo and Kim Marshall, I think, he's been a very useful resource to a lot of educators around the country. Do you think that student learning objectives can actually be standardized?
No. No. If you standardize them, if you standardize them too much, then you just have, other growth measures. And so you have some school districts who have tried to do it, and they've tried to standardize them in a couple of ways. Some of the principals or school districts have said everybody has a math or a reading goal. So you've got this poor music teacher who's like, I'm getting evaluated on a math goal. How fair is that? And it makes them feel that their work is discounted. And so if you standardize it too much, then it really isn't, the whole idea behind student learning objectives is that it's classroom based. Well, if you standardize it, it's not classroom based anymore.
What do you feel about the idea of the teachers developing these SLOs alongside their students or having student input on them?
I think that's a great idea. But I don't know that you're going to do that as an evaluation measure. But I do think that's a fantastic tool. And there is some research, although I've noticed that some of it's been a little there's been conflicting information, but there is some research that students setting their own goals and getting feedback on their own progress is actually a really effective tool. And what's interesting is I have another article that's coming out soon in Educational Evaluation and Policy Analysis, where I went and I analyzed all of the data that was used, like the policy briefs and the research that was used to justify doing this in the first place. And some of the evidence that they drew on to justify these SLOs came from was actually misused. When you go back to the original source, it was actually about students setting their own goals. That was what the research supported. There wasn't research to support these teacher goals, especially ones that were so long term.
Again, we think that SLOs, they are good on the surface, and they something that can be utilized to help to, I guess, advance teacher performance or evaluate teacher performance. But you still have that population of people who feel that we need to get rid of it. So what should school districts and administrators really be looking for when evaluating teachers?
I'm a big fan of qualitative data. And so I do think that there's no way around having administrators in classrooms and seeing what's going on. And some of this unnecessary paperwork keeps principals from doing that. I think they've got to be in the classrooms. And then in high schools, it's a little trickier because principals don't necessarily have expertise in all areas. So you have other people that they can rely on. But I do think, they're trying to remove subjectivity from this. And it's a subjective decision. It is somewhat subjective whether you think somebody's effective. And so I would actually like to see student learning objectives taken out of teacher evaluation. I don't think they're very useful.
And I was actually going to ask you, how have SLOs impacted teacher growth?
Well, so some of the data that came out of those merit pay, and remember, merit pay studies, you have to be careful using that for teacher evaluation because there was money involved, right? You take the money out, all of a sudden, is that valid research anymore? But there was some evidence that some teachers did report that they felt that there was some, that they contributed to their growth and development. But for the most part, especially the way they're being used for compliance, the evidence is really slim. The bottom line is that teacher growth is a lot dependent on school culture. And so if you put student learning objectives into a school with a great professional culture where the teachers have a growth mindset, they're going to use them and they're going to do great. If you put them in a school that does not have that kind of a mindset or a culture, they're not going to do anything.
Yeah, I was thinking that to have an SLO just for SLO's sake, and you're going to try to find out how teachers can grow, I guess the teachers in the latter two categories, the cynics and the sinners, they're not going to grow because all you're doing, if they're just filling them out for compliance, they're just going to set the bar as low as they possibly can, and just so that they can show that their students have met those bars. But there's no personal growth there. So they're just going to be the same teacher year after year after year. But I think in those schools that have, as you said, a culture of learning, such as setting up those PLCs and having those moments where they can reflect with one another, not just among themselves, those are the environments where these SLOs can contribute more readily and more efficiently to teacher development and teacher growth.
Well, and one of the things the principal said was that they really felt that this whole mindset toward evaluation that feels punitive and that is to some teachers feels unfair was getting in the way of them developing those professional cultures. Some of the teachers that I talked to that were kind of cynics about this were not cynics about their own practice. They actually had a growth mindset. They really cared about kids. They wanted to do better. But they're saying, especially a lot of the ones from Pennsylvania, they're like, the way that this system is set up has made it so that I can't buy into it because I don't think it's fair. Especially teachers who have the value added models, they really felt that is so poisonous to teachers that anything associated with it, the SLOs for some teachers are really hard to separate out from the other means of evaluation. They kind of put it all together in a package and we're like, I don't like this.
What are some of the other concerns that teachers have expressed to you around them being evaluated based on student achievement?
The biggest one is that teachers say, that there are a couple of things. They say that all of student achievement is not under their control. You've got kids who have poor attendance. You have kids who are not taking those tests seriously. We are over testing the kids. And so, some of them were forced to use their benchmark tests, like their reading or math benchmark tests as their student learning objective assessment. And they're like, I see these kids sitting in front of the computer. They're like, click, 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 I'm done. And, they're tired of it. And then the third piece is that, not all of students' achievement is based on one person anymore. I mean, we have a lot of collaboration in schools. You have some kids, a student who has a disability as an English learner, they have multiple teachers that are working with them. So how do you attribute their growth and success to one person? And so, teachers are really aware that there's a lot of complexity around student achievement, and to put it all on the teacher, I mean, a fourth grade teacher, part of what her effectiveness is based on is what the third grade teacher did. This is not, they're not widgets. You get a raw material, and then one person does the work, and then you have a product.
And it's always been amazing. How do you develop or have an ELL teacher or one of those support staff? How do you have them develop an SLO when they really don't see the student all day, like the art teacher may, or like the social studies teacher may? So it's always developing that divide among the teachers, among the staff, because of how you develop these SLOs and other learning objectives.
Well, even look at an art teacher. Do they see the kids for once a week? In some schools, they may see them in a middle school, depending on what their rotation is, they may see them like 4 days a week for 2 months, and that's it. I mean, these were designed by people who didn't really understand the variation in teachers and what they do. Like, we always think of the regular, elementary classroom teacher, but there's so many different kinds of teachers.
So if you had to leave our audience with one final thought about how we should really treat teacher evaluation and measure student achievement, what would that be?
I really think that you can't get away from the idea of a professional culture in the school. I think you need to hold teachers accountable for professional behavior. There needs to be an individual, there's nothing, you cannot get between the principal holding teachers accountable for certain kinds of behavior. Teachers have to become responsible for their own growth. You can try to force it from the outside, but you cannot reform a system from outside of it. It's the people inside the system who have to make the system work. So there is a place for accountability, but you're not going to see growth without professionalism.
Well, we would certainly like to thank our guest today, Dr. Linda Mayger, Associate Professor in the Department of Educational Administration and Secondary Education at the College of New Jersey, and author of the article, This is the Piece of the Pie We Can Control, Educators' Experiences with Student Learning Objectives as Performance Measures. Thank you for coming on our show today.
Thank you.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.